My name is Frederick, and I am 59 years old. I spent my whole life working with my hands building something honest. But that morning, sitting in the bank manager's office, I stared at a piece of paper that made no sense. $270,000. A loan in my name. A loan I never signed. The banker asked me about my son, Brandon. My heart sank. Something was terribly wrong. Have you ever discovered something that shattered everything you believed about your own family? If so, drop a comment below and tell me where you are watching from today. Before I continue, please hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell. What happened next changed my life forever. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin back in 1966. My father worked at one of the big breweries in town, spending long hours on the production line. My mother was a nurse at the county hospital, pulling double shifts whenever she could. We never had much, but we had enough. More importantly, my parents taught me the value of hard work and the importance of earning every single dollar that came into my pocket. After high school, I knew college was not in the cards for me. We simply could not afford it. So I went to trade school and learned how to fix cars. By the time I was 20, I'd landed a job at a local auto repair shop. The owner, a gruff man named Earl Patterson, took me under his wing. He taught me everything about engines, transmissions, and the business side of running a shop. I worked there for 15 years, saving every penny I could. When I turned 35, I finally had enough to open my own place. Frederick's Auto Repair, I called it. A small shop on the outskirts of Milwaukee, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I poured my heart and soul into that business. 6 days a week, sometimes 7, I was there. Oil under my fingernails, grease on my clothes, but pride in my heart. Over 24 years, I built that shop into something worth about $400,000. Not a fortune by some standards, but for a kid from a working-class family, it was everything. I met Margaret in 1990 at our local church. She was 24 years old, working as an accountant for a small manufacturing company. She had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen, and a laugh that could light up any room. We started talking after a Sunday service, and I knew right away that she was special. We dated for about a year before I got up the courage to propose. She said yes before I even finished asking. We got married in 1991 in that same little church where we met. It was a simple ceremony, maybe 40 people, mostly family and close friends. Margaret wore her mother's wedding dress, and I wore a suit I had bought on clearance at a department store. We didn't have much money for a honeymoon, so we drove up to a cabin by a lake and spent a week just being together. Those were some of the happiest days of my life. Margaret was the perfect partner. She understood the value of money because she had grown up poor too. She never complained about what we didn't have. Instead, she focused on making the most of what we did have. She kept our household budget tight-clipped coupons and found ways to stretch every dollar. But she also knew how to make our little house feel like a home. Fresh flowers on the table when she could afford them. Homemade dinners every night. A warm smile waiting for me when I came home exhausted from the shop. Our son Brandon came along in 1991, just a few months after we got married. He was a beautiful baby with Margaret's eyes and my stubborn chin. We were so proud of him. I remember holding him for the first time, this tiny little person, and thinking that I would do anything to give him a good life. I swore to myself that he would have opportunities I never had. Brandon's childhood was pretty normal, I suppose. He played Little League baseball, and I coached his team for a few years. We would throw the ball around in the backyard on summer evenings. Margaret would bake cookies on weekends, and the three of us would sit on the porch eating them while the sun went down. Those were good times, simple times. But even then I noticed things about Brandon that worried me a little. He always wanted the newest toys, the best sneakers, whatever his friends had. If another kid got something nice, Brandon would sulk until we got him something similar. Margaret and I tried to teach him that material things were not what mattered, but I'm not sure the lesson ever really sank in. After high school, Brandon surprised me by saying he did not want to learn a trade. He looked down on the kind of work I did, though. He never said it directly. He wanted to go to college and get a business degree. I was proud that he had ambitions, so I scraped together enough money to send him to the local community college. But after just 1 year, he dropped out. Said he didn't need a degree to make money. He wanted to be an entrepreneur. Over the next decade, Brandon bounced from one thing to another. He tried selling insurance, then got into some kind of multi-level marketing scheme. He dabbled in real estate for a while, got his license, but never really committed to it. Nothing ever stuck. He always had an excuse. The market was bad. His boss was unfair. The timing was wrong. It was never his fault. Through all of it, I helped him out. A few $100s here when his rent was due, 1,000 there when his car broke down. Margaret worried that we were enabling him, and looking back, she was probably right. But he was our son. What were we supposed to do, let him struggle on the street? Then, in 2018, Margaret got sick, breast cancer. By the time they found it, it had already spread. She fought hard for 8 months, but in the end, the disease was stronger than her will. I held her hand in that hospital room as she took her last breath. 27 years of marriage gone in an instant, the light of my life extinguished. Before she passed, Margaret made me promise something. She looked at me with those tired, beautiful eyes and said, "Take care of Brandon, but do not let him take advantage of you." She knew our son better than anyone. She loved him, but she saw his flaws clearly. "Do not let your love for him make you blind," she said. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is say no. I promised her I would remember that, but in my grief I think I forgot. About a year after Margaret died, Brandon came to dinner one night with a woman I had never met. Her name was Crystal. She was 28 years old with styled brown hair and designer clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She worked at some high-end fashion boutique downtown, selling expensive handbags and shoes to wealthy women. From the moment I met her, something felt off. Crystal talked constantly about money, about the vacations she wanted to take, the car she wanted to drive, the house she wanted to live in someday. She name-dropped luxury brands I had never heard of like they were old friends. Everything about her screamed expensive taste. Brandon was absolutely smitten. He hung on her every word, laughed at her jokes even when they were not funny, and looked at her like she was the most amazing creature on earth. I tried to talk to him privately a few times, suggesting that maybe he should take things slow, get to know her better before getting too serious. But he brushed off my concerns. He said I did not understand. He said Crystal was different. He said she was the one. They got engaged after just 6 months of dating. Crystal wanted a big, elaborate wedding, a destination ceremony in the Caribbean, followed by a reception at some fancy hotel. When Brandon told me how much it would cost, I nearly choked on my coffee. Over $50,000, he said, like it was a perfectly reasonable amount. I told him no. I said I would contribute $15,000, which was more than I could really afford, but that was my limit. Crystal was furious. She barely spoke to me at family gatherings after that. Brandon was caught in the middle, and I could tell our relationship was starting to strain. They ended up having a smaller wedding in 2020 using the money I gave them, plus whatever they could scrape together. It was a nice ceremony, nothing to be ashamed of, but Crystal pouted through most of it. I remember watching her at the reception, scrolling through her phone while guests tried to congratulate her. That image stuck with me. After the wedding, I hoped things would settle down. Brandon and Crystal rented an apartment downtown. Nice place, very modern, but the rent was astronomical, $2,500 a month for a 2-bedroom apartment. Brandon said he could afford it because his real estate business was picking up. I had my doubts, but I kept them to myself. He was a grown man now, married, responsible for his own choices. Over the next couple of years, I saw less and less of Brandon. He would call occasionally, usually when he needed something. A few $100s to cover an unexpected expense. Help with a car payment that one time. Little things that added up. I always said yes because that is what fathers do, or at least that is what I told myself. Meanwhile, Crystal's lifestyle seemed to be getting more extravagant by the day. Every time I checked her social media, which Margaret had taught me how to use before she passed, there was Crystal posting photos of designer handbags, expensive shoes, fancy restaurant dinners, luxury vacations. A brand new BMW appeared in one of her posts, a white X5 that must have cost at least $60,000. The caption said something about treating yourself because you deserve it. I wondered where all this money was coming from. Brandon's real estate career had never been particularly successful. Crystal's job at the boutique could not have paid that well, but I convinced myself it was none of my business. They were adults. Maybe they had figured out something I did not understand. Then this past March, I got a letter in the mail that changed everything. The envelope was from First National Bank. At first, I assumed it was just junk mail or maybe a promotional offer for a new credit card. Banks send that kind of stuff all the time. But when I opened it, my hands started to shake. It was a notice about a loan for $270,000, a loan that was apparently 2 months past due on payments, and according to the letter, that loan was in my name. I read it 3 times thinking I must be misunderstanding something. I had not taken out any loans. I had not signed any paperwork. My house was paid off years ago and my shop did not have any debt. There had to be some kind of mistake. I called the number on the letter, my heart pounding in my chest. After navigating through what felt like a dozen automated menus, I finally got a human being on the line. A pleasant young woman who asked me to verify my identity. I gave her my full name, Frederick James Harrison, my date of birth, my social security number, my address. Everything matched, she said. According to their records, I had taken out a personal loan of $270,000 approximately 18 months ago. The loan had been approved based on my excellent credit history and the equity in my business. For the first year, payments had been made on time. But for the past 2 months, nothing. I told her there had to be an error. I never applied for this loan. I never signed anything. I had no idea what she was talking about. The woman on the phone went quiet for a moment. Then she suggested I come into the branch in person to review the documentation. She said there might be some kind of fraud involved and they needed to investigate. I barely slept that night. My mind kept racing through possibilities. Could someone have stolen my identity? Some random criminal who somehow got my information, but how would they have known about my business, my credit history, all the details that apparently went into this loan application? The next morning, I drove to the bank before they even opened. I sat in my truck in the parking lot watching employees arrive, waiting for the doors to unlock. When they finally let me in, I asked to speak with the branch manager immediately. His name was Harold Foster, a man about my age with gray hair and glasses. He had a kind face, the sort of person who looked like he genuinely wanted to help. He took me to his office and pulled up my file on his computer. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "I have to tell you that this is a very unusual situation." He turned his monitor so I could see it. "According to our records, you came into this branch 18 months ago and applied for this loan in person. That is impossible," I said. "I have never set foot in this branch in my life." Mr. Foster frowned and clicked a few more buttons. He pulled up the original loan application. There was my name, my address, my social security number, my business information, and at the bottom there was a signature that looked almost exactly like mine. Almost, but not quite. I stared at that signature for a long time. I have been signing my name the same way for 40 years. I know every curve, every stroke. And this signature, while close, had subtle differences. The way the F looped at the top, the angle of the K in Frederick, small things that most people would never notice. But I noticed. "This is not my signature," I said. "Someone forged this." Mr. Foster leaned back in his chair, his expression troubled. He asked if I had any idea who might have done this, anyone who had access to my personal information, anyone who might have a reason to take out such a large loan. And that is when it hit me, like a punch to the gut that knocked all the air out of my lungs. Brandon. My son had access to all my information. He had helped me with some paperwork after Margaret died when I was too grief-stricken to handle things myself. He knew my social security number. He had copies of my identification documents. He even knew my signature well enough to forge it convincingly. Mr. Foster asked if I wanted to review the surveillance footage from the day the loan was originated. I nodded, unable to speak. He made some calls, and about an hour later a security officer brought in a laptop with the archived video. We watched the grainy footage together. A man walked into the bank, approached a loan officer, and sat down to fill out paperwork. The man was about 5 feet 9 inches tall, brown hair, early 30s. It was Brandon. My own son had walked into that bank, pretended to be me, and taken out a $270,000 loan in my name. I sat there and Mr. took it. Foster's office completely numb. He was asking me questions, but I could barely hear him. Something about filing a police report. Something about fraud investigation procedures. The words washed over me like water. Mr. Foster asked if I wanted him to contact the authorities right away. I shook my head. I needed time. I needed to understand why my son would do this to me. I needed to hear it from his own mouth. On the drive home, I pulled over twice because my vision was blurring with tears. Not tears of sadness exactly, more like tears of disbelief, of betrayal, of a pain so deep I did not have words for it. When I got home, I went through my files, my desk, my filing cabinet, all the places where I kept important documents. And I found more surprises waiting for me. 3 credit cards had been opened in my name, cards I had never applied for, cards I did not even know existed. The statements showed purchases at high-end department stores, expensive restaurants, travel agencies. One card had been used to buy first-class plane tickets to Paris. The total debt on those 3 cards was $45,000. Combined with the loan, my son had stolen over $300,000 from me. And because it was all in my name, my credit score had plummeted from 780 to 520. I sat at my kitchen table until it got dark outside. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat there holding a photograph of Brandon from when he was about 10 years old. He was wearing his little league uniform, grinning at the camera, holding up a trophy his team had won. I remember how proud I was that day. How proud I was of him. Where had that little boy gone? When had he turned into the kind of man who would steal from his own father? There was only one way to find out. I had to confront him. I drove to Brandon's apartment that same evening. The building was one of those modern high-rises downtown, all glass and steel, with a doorman in the lobby and a fitness center on the ground floor. The kind of place that screamed money and status, the kind of place my son had no business living in. The doorman called up to announce me, and a few minutes later I was riding the elevator to the 12th floor. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Part of me still hoped there was some explanation, some misunderstanding, some reason that did not involve my own flesh and blood deliberately destroying my financial life. Crystal answered the door. She was wearing a silk blouse and designer jeans with diamond studs in her ears that sparkled under the hallway lights. Her expression shifted from surprise to something like annoyance when she saw it was me. "Oh," she said. "You did not call first." "I need to talk to Brandon," I replied. "It is important." She stepped aside reluctantly and let me in. The apartment was even more impressive than I had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline. Leather furniture that looked brand new. Abstract art on the walls. A kitchen with marble countertops and stainless steel appliances. Brandon emerged from a back room and I could tell immediately from his face that he knew why I was there. His expression was a mixture of guilt and fear, the look of a child caught doing something he knew was wrong. "Dad," he said, "what brings you by?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the letter from the bank. The loan statement. I held it up so he could see it clearly. "You want to explain this to me?" Brandon's face went pale. He opened his mouth, closed it again, and looked over at Crystal as if hoping she would rescue him somehow. She just stared at the papers in my hand, her eyes widening slightly. "Dad," Brandon finally said, "I can explain." "Then explain," I said. "Explain how $270,000 got borrowed in my name. Explain how you walked into that bank pretending to be me. Explain how you forged my signature on loan documents." The silence that followed felt like it lasted forever. Brandon looked at the floor. Crystal looked at Brandon. Nobody looked at me. Finally, Brandon spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. "We needed the money for what I demanded." Brandon started to answer, but Crystal cut him off. She crossed her arms and lifted her chin, suddenly defensive. "For our life," she said, "for building our future, you would not understand." I turned to face her directly. "Try me." What followed was an itemized confession of how they had spent nearly $300,000 of stolen money. $80,000 on the BMW and its payments, $50,000 on vacations to Europe, the Maldives, and Dubai, $40,000 on designer clothes, handbags, and jewelry for Crystal, $30,000 on a second wedding ceremony, just the two of them, at a resort in Cancun, $25,000 on furniture for this apartment, $20,000 on dinners, parties, and entertainment, another $25,000 to cover living expenses when Brandon's income fell short. I listened to this list in stunned silence. Every dollar, every item, every choice, all of it funded by stealing from me. When they finished, I looked at my son, the little boy in the baseball uniform, the young man I had helped through so many struggles, the person I had trusted completely. "This is not borrowing," I said. "This is stealing. This is fraud. This is a crime." Brandon started to protest, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Did you think I would never find out? Did you think I would just pay off this debt and pretend it never happened? Did you think at all about what this would do to me?" Crystal spoke up again, her voice sharp. "You have money. You have that shop. You could easily pay this off and it would not even hurt you." I stared at her in disbelief. "Are you serious? I worked for 40 years for what I have, 40 years of 6-day weeks, 40 years of sacrifice, and you think I should just hand it over because you wanted designer handbags?" Brandon finally found his voice. "Dad, I was going to pay it back. Things just got complicated. I lost my job 8 months ago, and I did not know how to tell you. 8 months. You have been unemployed for 8 months. He nodded, looking miserable. But Crystal still needed things. She has a certain lifestyle. I could not just let her down. I looked back and forth between them. My son, who had apparently lost all sense of right and wrong. His wife, who had driven him to commit a crime to keep her in luxury goods. Here is what is going to happen, I said. I am going to the police. I am filing a report for identity theft and fraud. Brandon's face crumpled. Dad, you cannot. I am your son. They will put me in prison. You should have thought about that before you stole from me. Crystal changed tactics immediately. The defiance melted away, replaced by tears and pleading. She grabbed my arm, begging me to reconsider. She said they would pay everything back. She said they just needed time. She said I could not do this to my own family. I pulled my arm away from her grip. I looked at Brandon one more time. You have 48 hours to figure out how you're going to make this right. If I do not hear a real plan by then, I'm going to the authorities. I walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard Brandon call out, Dad, you cannot do this to me. I am your son. I stopped with my hand on the doorknob. I did not turn around. You did this to yourself, I said, and you did this to me first. I walked out of that apartment and did not look back. In the elevator going down, I leaned against the wall and let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. My son was a thief. My son had betrayed me. My son had looked me in the eye and blamed me for his crimes. When I got home, I went straight to the small table in the living room where I kept a photograph of Margaret. I sat down in front of it and talked to her the way I had done many times since she passed. I failed, I said to her picture. I did not protect him from himself. I did not protect myself from him. I'm so sorry. But even as I apologized, I knew what I had to do. Margaret had warned me. She had made me promise, and now I understood why. The next morning, Brandon called before I had even finished my coffee. His voice was different than the night before. Gone was the guilt and fear. In its place was something that sounded almost like pleading. Dad, he said, I have been thinking all night. I have a plan. I am listening. If you pay off the loan and the credit cards, I will pay you back over time, every month, whatever I can afford. It might take a few years, but I will make it right. A few years, I repeated. You stole $300,000, and you want to pay it back over a few years with whatever you can afford. It is the best I can do, he said. I do not have that kind of money. Neither do I. Brandon, that is my retirement. That is my life savings. That is everything I built. His tone shifted, became harder, more frustrated. You have the shop. You could sell it. You could take out a mortgage on your house. You have options. I could not believe what I was hearing. You want me to sell my business? The business I built from nothing, so you can pay for your wife's handbags. That is not fair, he said. Crystal is not the problem here. Crystal is exactly the problem, and so are you. We went back and forth like that for nearly 20 minutes. Brandon insisted he could not pay back the money quickly. I insisted I would not pay off his debts. Neither of us was willing to budge. Finally, Brandon's voice turned cold. Fine, he said. Do whatever you want. But remember, I am your only son. If you send me to prison, you will never see me again. He hung up before I could respond. That afternoon, I got another call. This time, it was Crystal. Her voice was sweet, almost syrupy. Nothing like the defensive woman I had confronted the night before. Frederick, she said, using my first name instead of calling me Dad or even Mr. Harrison, can we meet somewhere and talk? Just the two of us? I agreed more out of curiosity than anything else. We met at a coffee shop near my house. Crystal arrived wearing simpler clothes than usual, jeans and a sweater instead of designer labels. She had clearly put some thought into her appearance. She sat down across from me and immediately reached for my hand. I pulled it back. I want to apologize, she said, for how I acted last night. I was scared and I said things I did not mean. I waited for her to continue. The truth is, I love Brandon very much. He made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but he did it because he wanted to provide for me. Is that really so wrong? He stole from me, I said flatly. That is not providing. That is crime. Crystal's eyes filled with tears. I know, and I feel terrible about it, but think about what will happen if you go to the police. Brandon will go to prison. I will be alone. Our marriage will be destroyed. Is that really what you want? I studied her face, trying to determine if any of this emotion was genuine. It was hard to tell. What do you suggest? I asked. Pay off the debt, she said. Do it for Brandon. Do it for me. I promise we will make it up to you. When you get older, I will take care of you. We will move you into our home. You will never be alone." There it was. The real offer. Pay $300,000 now, and in exchange, Crystal would pretend to be a devoted daughter-in-law sometime in the distant future. I stood up from the table. "You think I'm a fool," I said. "You think because I'm almost 60 years old I must be desperate for someone to take care of me. Let me tell you something. I have been taking care of myself since I was 18 years old. I do not need you. I do not need your promises. And I certainly do not need to buy your affection with $300,000. Crystal's face changed. The tears disappeared, replaced by something cold and hard. "You are making a mistake," she said. "You have no idea what we are capable of. Is that a threat?" She did not answer. She just gathered her things and walked out, leaving her coffee untouched on the table. After that conversation, I knew I needed professional help. I called around and found a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud. His name was Richard Brennan, 62 years old with a reputation for being thorough and honest. I went to his office the next day and laid out everything. The loan documents, the credit card statements, the forged signatures, the surveillance footage the bank had shown me. Mr. Brennan listened carefully, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me gravely. "Mr. Harrison," he said, "what your son did is a serious federal crime. Identity theft and fraud at this level can carry a sentence of 5 to 10 years in prison." I nodded. I had suspected as much. "You have two options," he continued. "First, you can report this to the police and press charges. The evidence is overwhelming. Your son would almost certainly be convicted. And the second option, you could try to settle this privately. Have your son sign a confession and a repayment agreement. But I have to warn you, without the threat of prosecution, he has no real incentive to pay you back. And given what you have told me about his financial situation, it is unlikely he could repay this amount anyway. So either way, I lose." Mr. Brennan nodded sympathetically. "I'm afraid so. The question is whether you want justice or whether you want to protect your son from the consequences of his actions." I thought about Margaret, about her warning, about the promise I had made to her. "Prepare the paperwork to file a police report," I said. "I will make my final decision tomorrow." That evening, Brandon showed up at my house unannounced. He looked terrible, unshaven, clothes wrinkled, eyes red and puffy like he had been crying. "Dad," he said when I opened the door, "please, you have to listen to me." I stepped aside and let him in. We sat in the living room, the same room where he had played with toy cars as a child, the same room where we had celebrated countless birthdays and holidays as a family. "Crystal left," he said. "She packed a bag this morning and went back to her mother's house in California. She said she cannot be married to someone who is going to prison." I let that sink in. His wife had abandoned him the moment things got difficult. The woman he had stolen $300,000 for. The woman he had destroyed his relationship with his father for. "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it. Despite everything, I did not want my son to suffer. Brandon looked up at me with desperation in his eyes. "Dad, I have lost everything. My wife. My apartment because we cannot afford the rent. Probably my freedom if you go through with this. I have nothing left." I asked him a question that had been burning in my mind for days. "Did you come here tonight to ask for my forgiveness, or did you come here to ask me not to press charges?" He did not answer for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Both," he said. "I know I do not deserve either." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time I saw the truth clearly. He was not sorry for what he had done. He was sorry he got caught. He was sorry there were consequences. But deep down, he still believed he was entitled to my money. "I am filing the report tomorrow morning," I said. Brandon stood up abruptly, his face twisted with anger. "You will regret this," he said. "I promise you, you will regret this for the rest of your life." He stormed out of my house and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I sat alone in the quiet that followed, knowing that tomorrow would be one of the hardest days of my life. I woke up early the next morning after barely sleeping at all. The sun was just coming up, casting long shadows across my bedroom. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what I was about to do. Then I got up, showered, put on clean clothes, and went to the small table in the living room where Margaret's photograph sat. I knelt down in front of it the way I used to kneel beside her hospital bed during those final weeks. Am I doing the right thing, I asked her. He is our son, our only child. Am I really going to send him to prison? The photograph did not answer, of course. But in my mind, I heard Margaret's voice as clearly as if she were standing beside me. Love him enough to let him face the truth. That was what she had meant, I realized, all those years ago when she warned me not to let Brandon take advantage of my love. She knew that real love sometimes means allowing someone to experience the consequences of their choices, not to punish them, but to save them from something worse. I kissed the photograph gently and stood up. Then I called Mr. Brennan and told him I was ready. We met at the police station at 10 in the morning. Mr. Brennan had prepared all the documentation, the loan papers with the forged signature, the credit card statements, copies of the bank surveillance footage, everything laid out in a clear, damning narrative. The detective assigned to my case was named Sandra Coleman. She was about 45 years old with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She specialized in financial crimes and had seen cases like mine before. Mr. Harrison, she said, after reviewing the evidence, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of identity fraud I have encountered. The surveillance footage alone would be enough to convict, but combined with everything else, your son has virtually no defense. She asked me formally if I wanted to press charges. I said yes. I signed the complaint. Mr. Brennan witnessed it. Detective Coleman assured me that an arrest warrant would be issued within 24 hours. Walking out of that police station felt surreal. The sun was shining. People were going about their daily business. Cars drove past on the street. The world looked exactly the same as it had that morning. But everything had changed. The arrest happened the following evening. Detective Coleman called me to let me know. They had found Brandon at a friend's apartment where he had been staying since Crystal left, and they could no longer afford their place. He was taken into custody without incident. I did not go to watch. I could not bear to see my son in handcuffs. But I heard about it later from neighbors who had seen the news. Apparently, a few local outlets had picked up the story. Man arrested for defrauding own father of over $300,000. That kind of headline gets attention. Some people in my community praised me for having the courage to hold my son accountable. Others criticized me harshly. How could a father do that to his own child? What kind of man sends his son to prison? I heard the whispers. I saw the looks. I tried not to let it bother me. I knew the truth of what had happened. I knew the choice Brandon had made. And I knew that protecting him from consequences would not have helped him. It would have only enabled him to hurt me again or to hurt someone else. The preliminary hearing took place 2 weeks later. I attended sitting in the back of the courtroom, trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. Brandon was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked thinner than before, paler. He scanned the courtroom and our eyes met briefly. His expression was unreadable. The judge reviewed the charges: identity theft, bank fraud, credit card fraud, multiple counts on each. Brandon's court-appointed lawyer requested bail, arguing that his client was not a flight risk and had strong ties to the community. Detective Coleman testified about the evidence. The surveillance footage was played for the court. Brandon's forged signature was compared to my real one by a handwriting expert. The case against him was overwhelming. The judge denied bail, citing the severity of the charges and the amount of money involved. As they led Brandon away, he turned and looked at me one more time. His face was full of hatred, pure, undisguised hatred. This man who had come from my body, who I had raised from infancy, who I had loved unconditionally for 34 years. He blamed me. In his mind, he was the victim here. I was the villain who had ruined his life. I left the courtroom feeling like a piece of my soul had been torn away. Crystal never appeared at any of the hearings. She had filed for divorce within a week of Brandon's arrest. No one was surprised. The woman who had demanded designer handbags and luxury vacations wanted nothing to do with a man facing federal prison time. Brandon eventually realized that Crystal had only ever loved his money, or rather my money, that he had stolen. In a letter he sent me from jail, he admitted as much. "You were right about her," he wrote. "She never loved me. She only loved what I could give her. I was too blind to see it. It was the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I had received from him. But it was not an apology for what he had done to me. Not really." The legal process moved slowly, as these things often do. Months passed between the hearings. Mr. Brennan kept me informed of every development, but there was little for me to do except wait. In the meantime, Mr. Brennan worked with the bank to resolve my financial situation. Because the fraud had been clearly documented and my son had confessed to his lawyer as part of plea negotiations, the bank agreed to void the loan entirely. They removed it from my credit report and stopped all collection efforts. The same happened with the credit cards. Once the fraud was proven, the card companies wrote off the debts and cleared my name. My credit score began to recover. Within 6 months, it had climbed back up to 740. The bank also paid me $15,000 in compensation, admitting that their verification procedures had failed. They should have caught the fraud when Brandon applied for the loan in person. There were supposed to be safeguards in place. Those safeguards had failed. I donated that money to a charity that Margaret had always supported, a local shelter for women and children escaping domestic violence. It felt like the right thing to do with money that had come from such an ugly situation. 2 months after the preliminary hearing, Brandon's lawyer contacted Mr. Brennan with a plea offer. Brandon was willing to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a lighter sentence. The final agreement called for Brandon to plead guilty to 1 count of federal identity theft and 1 count of bank fraud. In exchange, the prosecutors would recommend a sentence of 3 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. He would also be required to pay full restitution, which would take the form of wage garnishment once he was released and employed again. Mr. Brennan asked if I wanted to oppose the plea deal and push for a longer sentence. I thought about it carefully. Part of me wanted Brandon to face the full weight of his crimes. 10 years, 15 years, whatever the maximum was. But another part of me remembered the little boy in the baseball uniform, the young man who had struggled to find his way, the son I had loved despite his flaws. Accept the deal, I told Mr. Brennan. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following month. I was asked if I wanted to deliver a victim impact statement. I declined. I did not trust myself to speak without breaking down, and I was not sure what I would even say. The day of sentencing, I sat in the same spot in the back of the courtroom. Brandon was brought in, still in that orange jumpsuit, still looking thin and worn. The judge asked if he had anything to say before sentencing. Brandon stood up slowly. "Your Honor," he said, "I want to apologize. To the court, to the bank, and especially to my father." He turned and looked at me directly. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. I know that does not mean much now. I know I hurt you in ways that can never be fixed. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. And I hope someday you can forgive me." It was the first time he had actually apologized, not for getting caught, not for the consequences he was facing, but for hurting me. I did not respond. I did not trust any words that might come out of my mouth. The judge sentenced Brandon to 3 years in federal prison as agreed. He was led away in handcuffs. At the door of the courtroom, he looked back at me one more time. This time his expression was not hatred, it was something more like sorrow. After the hearing, Mr. Brennan walked me to my truck. "You did a hard thing," he said, "but you did the right thing. Most parents in your situation would have just paid the debt and pretended it never happened. They would have enabled their children to keep making the same mistakes." "I know," I said, "but it does not make it hurt any less." He nodded sympathetically. "Give it time," he said. "Justice takes a while to feel like justice." As for Crystal, she vanished from Brandon's life completely. The divorce was finalized while he was awaiting trial. She took whatever she could liquidate from their shared possessions and disappeared back to California. Someone told me she was already dating another man, some wealthy real estate developer she had met online. Brandon learned the truth about her the hard way. She had never loved him. She had loved the lifestyle he provided, funded entirely by stolen money. When that money dried up, so did her interest. In his letters from prison, Brandon wrote about this realization often. He finally understood that Crystal had manipulated him, that his desire to impress her had driven him to make choices that destroyed his life. It was not an excuse for what he did, but at least it was understanding. 3 months after Brandon began serving his sentence, I started receiving letters from him regularly. The first few were short and formal, updates on his daily routine, descriptions of the facility, small talk about nothing important. But gradually the letters changed. They became longer, more reflective, more honest. In one letter, Brandon told me about a program he had joined in prison, a rehabilitation initiative focused on financial literacy and personal responsibility. He was learning about budgeting and debt management, about the psychology of impulse spending, about how to set realistic goals and work toward them honestly. "I am finally learning things I should have learned 20 years ago," he wrote, "things you tried to teach me, but I was too stubborn to listen." Another letter described his work assignment in the prison library. He had started reading books about self-improvement and personal growth. Authors I'd never heard of, but whose names he quoted enthusiastically. He said he was beginning to understand where his life had gone wrong. I always thought I deserved more than I had, he wrote. More money, more success, more stuff. But I never wanted to do the work to earn it. I thought shortcuts were acceptable. I thought rules did not apply to me. I was wrong. 6 months into his sentence, Brandon called me for the first time. Phone calls from prison are expensive and limited, so I was surprised to hear his voice. "Dad," he said, "I just wanted to hear your voice. I wanted to tell you something. I'm listening. I understand now. What you did, why you did it. You were not trying to punish me. You were trying to save me from myself." I held the phone tightly, struggling to keep my composure. "If you had just paid off the debt," Brandon continued, "I would have learned nothing. I would have kept making the same mistakes, maybe worse mistakes, but because you held me accountable, I finally had to face who I had become, and I did not like what I saw." There was a long pause. "Thank you, Dad," he said finally. "Thank you for loving me enough to let me fail." After that phone call, something shifted inside me. The weight I had been carrying for months began to lift slightly. Not completely. The betrayal still hurt. The lost trust would take years to rebuild if it could be rebuilt at all. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like there might be hope for my son. While Brandon worked on himself in prison, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I continued running the auto repair shop, which had always been my anchor. My employees were supportive, and my loyal customers kept coming back. Work kept me busy and gave me purpose. My old friend Tom Whitfield started coming by the shop more often. We had known each other since high school, but had drifted apart over the years. Now, with everything that had happened, we reconnected. He would bring coffee in the mornings, and we would talk about life, about family, about getting older. Tom never judged me for what I had done. He told me straight out that he would have done the same thing. "Kids need to learn that actions have consequences," he said. "You were not being cruel. You were being a father." I also started attending a support group at my church. Not for victims of crime specifically, but for parents struggling with difficult children. There were about a dozen of us, all with different stories, but similar pain, addiction, mental illness, criminal behavior. We shared our experiences and tried to help each other through. I even started volunteering with a local organization that helped families dealing with fraud and identity theft. I shared my story at community events, warning others about the signs to watch for. It felt good to turn my suffering into something useful. 1 year after Brandon began his sentence, I received a letter that was different from all the others. "Dear Dad." It began, "I have been doing a lot of thinking about what I want my life to look like when I get out of here." He wrote about his plans. He wanted to get a job doing honest work, even if it was hard and didn't pay much. He wanted to live simply in a small apartment that he could afford on his own. He wanted to rebuild his reputation through years of consistent behavior. "I know it will take time for you to trust me again," he wrote. "Maybe you never will. But I want you to know that I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the son you deserve." The letter ended with a simple request. "When I get out, can we talk? Not about money. Not about the past, just talk, father and son, like we used to." I read that letter at least 10 times. And then I wrote back, "Yes," I said, "when you get out, we can talk." Brandon was released after serving 2 years and 8 months of his 3-year sentence. Good behavior and participation in rehabilitation programs had earned him early release. I did not meet him at the prison gates. That felt like too much too soon. But I did send him money for a bus ticket home and the address of a halfway house where I had arranged for him to stay. A week after his release, Brandon came to see me at the shop. He looked different than I remembered. Older, certainly, but also calmer, more grounded. The desperate energy that had always surrounded him was gone, replaced by something quieter. "Hi, Dad," he said. "Hi, son," I replied. We stood there for a moment, neither of us sure what to say or do. Then Brandon took a step forward and put his arms around me. It was the first time we had hugged since before this whole nightmare began. I held my son for a long time, and for the first time in years I cried, not tears of pain or betrayal, tears of something that felt almost like hope. Brandon found a job with a construction company a few weeks later. It was hard physical labor, nothing glamorous, but it paid a fair wage and he never complained. He showed up early, stayed late, and did whatever was asked of him. His supervisor told me he was one of the best workers they had. He calls me every Sunday now. We talk about nothing important. His week, my week, sports, the weather, just father and son catching up, the way it should have always been. He is paying back what he stole little by little. Every month, a portion of his paycheck goes toward restitution. At this rate, it will take him 15 years to pay off the full amount. But he has never missed a payment, not once. Last month, Brandon came to visit me at my house. He walked through the rooms where he had grown up, looking at old photographs on the walls. He stopped in front of a picture of Margaret and stared at it for a long time. "I wish I could tell her I'm sorry," he said quietly. I put my hand on his shoulder. "She knows," I said. "Wherever she is, she knows." Standing here today, almost 3 years since that letter from the bank first arrived, I can finally see the full picture. My son stole from me. He betrayed my trust in the worst possible way. He nearly destroyed my financial security and my peace of mind. But by holding him accountable, by refusing to enable his behavior, by making him face the consequences of his choices, I gave him something far more valuable than money. I gave him a second chance to become the man he was always capable of being. It has not been easy. There are still moments when the old wounds ache. There are still nights when I lie awake wondering if I did the right thing. There are still silences between us that speak louder than words. But we are healing. Slowly. Imperfectly. Together. Margaret was right all those years ago. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is say no. Sometimes love means letting someone fall so they can learn to pick themselves up. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your child is not money or protection or comfort. Sometimes the greatest gift is consequences. Brandon will finish paying his restitution in about 12 more years. He will be 46 years old by then, and I will probably be gone or close to it. But I know he will keep making those payments even after I am no longer here to see them, because he finally understands what they mean. They mean accountability. They mean responsibility. They mean becoming the kind of man who takes ownership of his mistakes instead of running from them. They mean growing up. I still have that old photograph of Brandon in his little league uniform grinning at the camera with his trophy. Sometimes I look at it and wonder where that innocent little boy went. But other times I look at it and I see him again. Not in the photograph, in my son's face today, in his determination to make things right, in his willingness to do the hard work of becoming a better person. That little boy never really went away. He just got lost for a while, and now finally he has found his way home. I do not know what the future holds for Brandon or for me. I do not know if our relationship will ever fully recover. But I do know this: my son is finally on the right path, and that is worth more than all the money in the world. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to hold someone you love accountable? Have you ever had to let someone face the consequences of their actions, even when it broke your heart? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel so you do not miss more stories like this one. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for walking this journey with me. I hope it has given you something to think about. Whatever challenges you are facing in your own family, whatever difficult decisions are keeping you up at night, I want you to know that you are not alone. And sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other.